There's a phrase Japanese gardeners have passed down for I don't know how many generations. Nai hansaku. It means the seedling is half the crop. And there's a longer version that goes even further. Nai hansaku, hachibu saku. Raising the seedling is 80% of the whole harvest. 80%. Think about what that's really saying. Before your plant ever sees your garden soil, before it flowers, before it fruits, most of the game is already won or lost. Not in the summer, not in the fertilizer, in that little cell of dirt where the seedling starts its life. Now here's the part that got me. The average American gardener spends about 4 minutes on a seedling. Poke a seed in a cup, set it on the windowsill, water it when you remember, and wait. A Japanese kitchen grower fusses over that same seedling like it's a newborn, and then transplants it and walks away almost satisfied because they know the hard part is behind them. Same seed, same sun. One grower is pouring the effort in at the moment it multiplies, and the other is pouring it in 3 months later when it barely moves the needle. I've grown food for a long while, and when I finally understood what these growers were doing, it rearranged how I think about my whole season. Because it isn't really about Japan. It's about timing your effort where the plant can actually use it. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the last thing I want to tell you is the one that took me the longest to learn. The reason a Japanese grower can pull more food out of a patch the size of a bath towel than most of us pull out of half the yard. And it has almost nothing to do with working harder. If that sounds like your kind of afternoon, settle in and hit subscribe. This is a quiet corner of the internet where we dig up the growing wisdom folks used to know by heart, and then we look at what the science actually says about why those old ways worked. Old hands, new proof. That's the whole idea here. Today, we're borrowing a few things Japan understands about growing vegetables that most Americans never learned, and we're rerouting them right in your backyard, in your zone, with the vegetables you already grow. So, let's start where they start, with the seedling. When you buy a 6-pack of tomatoes at the box store in May, look at what you're actually buying. Tall, stretched, pale green, a long bare stem waving around, looking for something to lean on. We've been trained to think that's a big healthy start. It isn't. That's a leggy seedling, and leggy means it grew reaching for light. It never quite got, stretching its stem thin instead of building itself thick. A Japanese grower would look at that plant and see a weak start they'd have to spend all summer making up for. What they want instead is the opposite. Short, stocky, a stem thick as a pencil, dark green, with the leaves stacked close together instead of strung far apart. They call a plant like that sturdy, and they'll do real work to get it. They give their seedlings hard light, so they never have to stretch. They keep them a touch cool and a touch hungry on purpose, because a seedling that's been a little stressed grows compact and tough instead of soft and tall. And here's a trick that sounds almost cruel the first time you hear it. They'll run a hand or a light board gently across the tops of the seedlings once a day, just brushing them, or set a small fan to wobble them. That little bit of daily motion tells the plant it's living in the wind, and a plant that thinks it's in the wind builds a thicker, stronger stem to stand up to it. Now, that's the old practice. Here's the science underneath, because this one's proven cold. That daily brushing has a name in the plant labs. It's called thigmomorphogenesis, which is a mouthful, but all it means is that plants change how they grow in response to being touched. A brushed or wind-rocked seedling puts less energy into shooting up tall and more into thickening its stem and its base. Researchers have measured it over and over. So that old grandma running her hand across the seed tray every morning wasn't being superstitious. She was triggering a real growth response, and she was doing it at the exact moment it mattered most, when the plant was small enough to shape. Do this at home, and it costs you nothing. Get your seedlings the brightest light you can, right up close if it's a shop light, so they never stretch. Run your fingertips over the tops once a day, or point a little fan at them. Keep them on the lean side rather than the pampered side. You're not being harsh. You're building the plant the way these growers build it, thick and ready, so that when it goes in the ground, it takes off instead of flopping over. The seedling is half the crop. Spend your effort there, and the rest of the summer gets easier. And while we're here, let me plant a question in your mind, because I want you to tell me in the comments, what's the one vegetable you can never seem to grow well? The one that always lets you down? Drop it below. I read them, and half the time the fix is something we're about to talk about. All right, number 2. Once that sturdy seedling is ready to go outside, watch what a Japanese grower does that most of us skip. They don't just carry the tray from the warm windowsill straight into the open garden. They harden it off. Hardening off just means giving the plant a slow, gradual introduction to the real world before you plant it out for good. For about a week to 10 days, they set the seedlings outside for a few hours in a sheltered spot, out of harsh midday sun and hard wind, then bring them back in. Each day, a little longer, a little more exposure. By the end of the week, the plant has spent a full day and night outside, and it's ready. Then, and only then, does it go in the ground. Skip this, and here's what happens, and I've done it, so I'm not scolding you from up on a hill. You take a soft seedling that's lived its whole life at a cozy 72 degrees on the windowsill, and you slam it out into wind and direct sun and a cold night, and it goes into shock. The leaves bleach white or turn papery. Growth just stops dead for 2-3 weeks. Sometimes the whole plant sulks so hard it never fully recovers. You lost a month, and you thought you were ahead by rushing. The science here is simple and real. A plant grown inside has thin, tender leaves and a weak, waxy coating because it never needed armor. Those hours outside toughen the leaf surface, thicken that protective cuticle, and get the plant used to real light and real temperature swings before its life depends on it. You're not wasting a week. You're spending a week to save a month. That's the whole Japanese instinct in one move. Patience early, so you're not paying for it later. For you, at home, tie it to your conditions, not a calendar. Don't plant your warm season crops out until the danger of frost has passed for your area and your soil has genuinely warmed. Tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers don't even want to be out there until the soil is up around 60 degrees. A cheap soil thermometer tells you more than any date on a seed packet, because a last frost in Zone 5 and a last frost in Zone 8 are a month or more apart, and the plant only cares about the dirt it's sitting in. Harden off that last week, wait for warm soil, then plant. The plant that goes in relaxed instead of shocked is the plant that's fruiting while your neighbor's is still sitting there, stunned. Number 3, and this is where a lot of American gardens go wrong, because we've got room and we use all of it. Space. Walk through a Japanese kitchen garden, a kate-sayen, and the first thing that hits you is how much is packed into how little. These are often tiny plots, a strip beside the house, a few raised boxes, a rooftop. Land is precious, so nothing is wasted, and the whole garden goes up instead of out. Cucumbers, tomatoes, bitter melon, beans, all of it climbing. Trained up nets, up bamboo, up strings, up neat little A-frame trellises. The grower is thinking in 3 dimensions, while most of us are still thinking in 2. Now the reflex over here, when a tomato plant wants to sprawl, is to let it sprawl, or cage it loosely, and let it turn into a bush. And it feels generous, giving the plant all that room. But a sprawling plant is a plant lying in its own damp shade, and that's where the trouble starts. Here's the old discipline. You grow it up a single stake, and you keep it to 1 main stem, maybe 2, and you pinch out the rest. Which brings us to the move that Americans resist the hardest, and I understand why. Because it feels like you're hurting the plant. Pruning the suckers. On a tomato, where a leaf branch meets the main stem, you get a little shoot growing up out of that crotch, out of that armpit of the plant. That's a sucker. Left alone, every sucker becomes a whole new stem, with its own leaves and its own suckers, and before long, your one tomato plant is a tangled thicket. A Japanese grower pinches those out when they're small, keeping the plant to 1 clean vertical stem trained up the stake. People hear that and flinch. You're cutting off growth. Won't that mean fewer tomatoes? And here's the science, and it surprised me the first time I really sat with it. A plant only has so much energy. Every sucker you let grow is leaves and stem and flowers all demanding a share of that energy, and the plant spreads itself thin, trying to feed 100 little places at once. Pinch the suckers, and you funnel that same energy into the one stem and the fruit that's actually setting on it. You often get fewer tomatoes, but bigger ones that ripen earlier on a plant you can actually reach into. And here's the part the science nails down. Air. A pruned single-stem plant trained up a stake has air moving through it, and sun reaching every leaf. A sprawling bush is a still, damp, shaded jungle in the middle, and still, damp shade is exactly what fungal disease wants. Early blight, late blight, that powdery mildew that coats the leaves gray, they all take hold fastest in stagnant, humid air. When you open the plant up and stand it up tall, you're not just saving space. You're drying the leaves out after every rain and every dew, and a dry leaf is a leaf that doesn't get sick. The old growers didn't have the word for the fungus. They just knew the open, upright plant stayed healthy, and the sprawling one rotted, so they grew everything upright. The science just tells us why they were right. For your garden, pick your climbers, tomatoes, cucumbers, pole beans, even squash if you're bold, and give them something real to climb. A trellis, a net, a cattle panel bent into an arch, a good tall stake. Keep your indeterminate tomatoes to 1 or 2 stems and pinch the suckers every few days while they're small. Grow up, not out. You'll fit more in, you'll walk less, you'll pick standing up, and your plants will be drier, healthier, and easier to reach. That's a lot of wins out of one change in how you think about the vertical foot above your soil. Let me stop here and pull the thread together for a second, because we're halfway through, And I don't want you to lose the shape of this. Everything Japan understands about growing vegetables comes back to one idea, and it isn't a trick. It's a mindset. Do the small right thing at the exact moment it matters, and you won't have to do the big desperate thing later. Build the seedling strong so you're not nursing a weakling all summer. Harden it off so it doesn't shock. Prune and lift the plant so it doesn't get sick. Every one of these is a little bit of care spent early in exchange for a lot less trouble down the road. Hold on to that because it runs straight through the rest of what I want to show you. Number 4. The soil and one Japanese practice that turns your kitchen scraps into some of the best fertilizer you can make. Bokashi. Now most of us know composting. You pile up your leaves and scraps in a bin out back, you turn it, and a year later you've got some crumbly black gold if the raccoons didn't get into it. Bokashi is a different animal, and it comes out of Japanese farming. Instead of letting scraps rot out in the open with air, you ferment them, sealed up without air. The same basic idea as making pickles or sauerkraut or miso. You layer your food scraps in a bucket with a bran that's been charged with beneficial microbes, press it down tight, seal the lid, and let those microbes pickle the whole thing into a rich, sour, pre-digested material you then work into your soil. And the reason it beats a regular pile for a lot of folks is practical. Because it's sealed and fermented instead of rotting in the air, it doesn't stink the way an open pile can. It doesn't draw flies and animals the same way. And here's the big one. It'll take things a normal backyard pile struggles with, like meat and dairy and cooked food. It works fast, it works in a bucket, on a balcony, and it fits a tiny space, which is exactly why it grew up in a crowded country where nobody had room for a giant heap out back. The science is genuinely interesting. Those fermenting microbes lock up the nutrients in the scraps instead of letting them gas off into the air the way they do when food rots the ordinary way. So more of the good stuff actually makes it into your ground. When you finally dig that fermented material into the soil, you're not just feeding the plants, you're feeding the living web of microbes and worms in the dirt itself. And rich living soil is the thing that grows rich living plants. The old idea that you feed the soil and let the soil feed the plant, Japanese growers have practiced that for centuries, and modern soil biology has spent the last few decades proving that the health of that underground world is most of the game above ground too. You don't need to buy a thing you can't pronounce to take the lesson. The lesson is, stop throwing your kitchen scraps in the trash and start turning them back into your soil one way or another, whether that's a classic compost pile, a worm bin, or a sealed bokashi bucket under the sink. Feed the soil, and the soil feeds the garden. That's an old truth in a lot of countries, but Japan built a particularly clever, small space, fast way to do it. Number 5 is a small one, but it's the kind of detail that separates a tidy, productive garden from a struggling one, and it's pure Japanese attention to the little things, shade cloth, and knowing that more sun is not always better. We get it into our heads that vegetables want full sun, all the sun, always, and for a lot of the season that's true. But come the deep heat of summer in a lot of the country, that blazing afternoon sun turns into a problem. Lettuce bolts, meaning it shoots up a flower stalk and turns bitter the second it gets too hot. Spinach quits entirely. Tomatoes can actually stop setting fruit when it's too hot, and the fruit that's ripening gets scalded pale and leathery on the sun side. A careful grower watches for this and does something about it. In Japan, you'll see conracia, shade netting, stretched over the summer beds, knocking the intensity down just enough to keep the cool weather crops from giving up and to keep the fruiting crops from cooking. The science is straightforward. Every plant has a temperature range where it does its work, and above that range, it starts shutting down to protect itself. A tomato's pollen can go sterile in a stretch of high heat, which is exactly why your plant flowers beautifully in a July heat wave and then just drops those flowers without setting a single fruit. A stretch of light shade in the worst of the afternoon pulls the leaf temperature back down into the range where the plant can actually keep working. You're not depriving it of sun. You're taking the sharpest edge off the heat at the one time of day it does damage. For you, this is as simple as it sounds. In the hot months, throw a length of shade cloth, 30 or 40% is plenty, over your lettuce and greens to keep them from bolting, and over your tomatoes and peppers through a real heat wave to help them keep setting fruit. An old bed sheet on some hoops will do in a pinch. It's a small, fussy, attentive move, and small, fussy, attentive moves are the whole Japanese playbook. Now, the last one, the one I told you took me the longest to understand, and the one that ties this entire thing into a single idea you can carry into your garden tomorrow. For a long time, I thought the reason a Japanese grower gets so much out of a scrap of land was all these techniques stacked up. The seedlings, the trellises, the pruning, the shade cloth, and those matter. But underneath all of it, there's something quieter, and it's really a way of seeing. It's the idea that the garden is one connected system you tend with attention, not a set of plants you install and then fight with. There's a whole philosophy over there, sometimes wrapped up in the phrase "mot and I," which is a kind of deep dislike of waste, a sense that letting anything go to waste, a scrap, a square foot, a little bit of afternoon effort, is almost a small shame. And when you garden like that, you stop wasting. You don't waste the seedling stage, so the plant starts strong. You don't waste vertical space, so you grow up and fit 3 times as much in. You don't waste the kitchen scraps, so they go back into the soil. You don't waste the plant's energy on suckers and disease, so you prune and lift and keep it clean. You don't waste your own summer fighting problems because you spent a little attention early at the exact points where a little attention does the most good. It's not a harder way to garden. Honestly, once it clicks, it's an easier one. You're just moving your effort to the front of the season, to the small moments that multiply, instead of pouring it in at the end when the plant can barely use it. That's the thing that took me years to feel in my bones, and it's the real gift hiding inside all these techniques. Tend the whole thing with attention, waste nothing, and put your care where the plant can actually spend it. Everything else, the strong seedling, the healthy upright plant, the rich soil, the full little plot, all of that just falls out of that one way of seeing. So, let me hand you the whole basket in one go, so you've got it before your next trip out to the garden. The seedling is half the crop, so spend your effort there. Grow it short and sturdy under bright light, brush it with your hand or a fan every day to thicken the stem, and keep it a little lean instead of pampered. Harden it off over a week before it goes out, and don't plant your warm crops until frost is past and your soil is genuinely up around 60 degrees, whatever the calendar says. Grow up instead of out. Trellis your climbers, keep your tomatoes to 1 or 2 stems, and pinch the suckers small so the plant stays open, airy, dry, and free of the fungal disease that loves a damp, sprawling jungle. Feed your soil, not just your plants, and turn your kitchen scraps back into the ground, whether that's a compost pile or a sealed bokashi bucket. Give your greens and your fruiting plants a little shade in the worst summer heat so they don't bolt or drop their flowers. And under all of it, garden like nothing should go to waste, and put your attention at the front of the season where it multiplies. Do those things, and I promise you'll notice it. Not because you worked harder, but because you worked earlier and smarter on a smaller patch, the way growers on the other side of the world have done for longer than any of us have been alive. It turns out you don't win the garden by fighting it all summer. You win it in the quiet moments at the start, in a seed tray on a windowsill, with a hand brushing gently across the tops of the seedlings. If this helped you look at your own garden a little differently, subscribe and stick around, because next time we're staying with these small space growers and getting into the one they may understand better than anyone, growing a real harvest out of nothing but containers on a patio, and the mistake that quietly starves half the pots in America. You won't want to miss that one. Until then, start your seedlings strong, keep your plants standing tall, and waste nothing. See you in the garden.